Relatives repeatedly tried to smuggle drugs, tobacco, or even just pens into the prison.
When I think about where I work, the first thing that comes to mind is that it's a huge challenge.
Constant vigilance. All tools that the prison director uses to attempt one thing above all else: preventing another riot. And although the prisoners aren't allowed out of their cells, they still train every day, particularly the inmates in high-security Block 6, seemingly ready for battle. To do this, they go as far as creating a clear cell schedule. 2 inmates at a time are allowed to use the few spare square meters to keep fit, until the next time they are let out. And the prisoners here are subjected to even tougher conditions than the others. Apart from opening cell after cell, this means one thing above all else: more guards, and a physical search of every single inmate to avoid smuggled weapons, and at all costs, stabbings, gang warfare, and death. After all, inmates from the various drug cartels come into direct contact with one another in the yard. Even the guards don't enter the yard in Section 6. For the inmates, their 2 hours in the yard means mainly one thing: their only chance to contact the outside world. This wasn't always the case. Up until 2002, La Mesa was a completely different prison, one with hardly any guards, one where any inmate inside its walls could do whatever he wanted. It was known as El Pueblito, the little village, a prison town with its own rules and laws. Back then, La Mesa was ruled by the country's most notorious drug barons.
We used to have everything: shops, restaurants, etc. But there was also a huge difference between those who had money and those who didn't. I did well. I worked as a bodyguard for an important inmate. Even though I was constantly on the lookout for people breathing down my neck, I was all right.
And that is from a time that now only the oldest inmates are able to remember. Like one particular inmate in Section 7, the women's block. Dolores Sanchez has been here since 1999. Her sentence, 34 years for kidnapping.
We used to be able to just open our cells and go wherever we wanted. We were free. However, other things are better nowadays. There are no drugs, no alcohol, and no corruption anymore. So it's safer and more structured now.
These days, Dolores acts as a nurse and is permitted to issue medicines like insulin and antidepressants to those suffering in the women's block. And this gives her just that little bit more freedom than most of the other inmates. However, Dolores still remembers when she led a completely different life behind bars, one with an income, along with fast food restaurants, laundrettes, and nightclubs, but also a whole lot of drug dealing and violence. After being built in 1956, it took the government until 2002 to raze the old La Mesa to the ground. The prison was then restructured. Even now, Dolores isn't sure which of these two worlds is better and which one is tougher.
In those days, there were no rules. No one said you can't assault anyone, you can't take drugs or alcohol, you can't prostitute yourself, or anything like that. The prison management only cared about making sure no one escaped. That was it. We used to have computers, we had restaurants, we all had good money. Now there is none of that, no cash.
These days, La Mesa at least has shops. The prison sells instant soups, snacks, and soft drinks in each of the 5 yards. They also sell really basic items, like toilet paper, things prisoners need to buy themselves, and luxury goods such as hair dye. The sales clerks are inmates, like Jose Varos Guerrero, sentenced to almost 7 years for possession of a weapon. Inmates pay using their fingerprints. Everything is completely electronic. The prison is a kind of bank. This enables it to control who owns what, and it can even freeze your account.
Then you can only buy the essentials. No cookies, for instance. Nothing special. What's sanctioned?
Always in high demand, fresh food for the more affluent inmates, prepared in the men's prison kitchen. And during delivery, an important rule applies: strict separation of the sexes. Men and women are banned from any contact in La Mesa. The workers hold full responsibility for the quality and quantity.
I'm making sure the quality is okay and checking if there's the right number of sandwiches.
Should any of the items go missing, Jose risks facing the worst punishment of them all: banishment to a place where no one in the whole of La Mesa wants to end up.
The punishment would be the isolation cell. They would cut your yard time, and you wouldn't be able to call your family anymore.
And a stay in isolation means a whole lot more than just solitary confinement in La Mesa. It's a punishment that all inmates fear. While on the hunt for the next riot, Commander Flores arrives at a place that not even the guards like to visit. One of the prison's isolation cells. Fighting, weapons, drugs. Anyone who breaks the prison's rules winds up here. And that means even less sunlight, no electricity, locked away. Inmates vegetate in isolation for days on end. The cells are dominated by sweat, stagnant air, and an ever-increasing amount of mold on the walls. Inmates here even have to go without toilet paper. They can't be sure when they'll be allowed out.
The overall situation here is just a huge problem. It's unbelievably hot. All you can do is sit or stand up for a short amount of time. We're in total isolation, without any air supply, apart from one small fan. They just leave us to rot away in here and shut the doors. The other problem is the water. There isn't running water from the tap every day. Today there is, but it's not always the case. There isn't enough to drink.
Locked away for weeks and months. All the inmates can do is vegetate here. Everyone in the isolation cell comes from Block 6, the block for cartel killers and serial murderers. And most of them are new arrivals. Director Acevedo is here to check the risk status. After all, each one of these cells is home to half a dozen alpha males or more. Rivalries and fights to become top dog can spring up at any time. And this is exactly what the criminals have been learning to deal with on the streets of Tijuana for years.
Tijuana is a city where a lot happens. It's also the city with the highest number of border crossings in the world. And because of that, there's a lot of crime and kidnapping here. All problems that we need to sort out. What goes on outside the prison is exactly the same as what goes on inside the prison. It's just a mirror for the city.
Outside, gang members fight each other. Inside, they have to live with their enemies. Just like cartel hitman Francisco. He shares a cell with members of other gangs. He has gradually learned to accept this fact, and he's not sure if he ever wants to return to his old life. Be it then or now, he has come to realize that he has spent a lot longer living an unfree life than the 7 years he has spent in La Mesa. Francisco's biggest worry? He hasn't heard anything from his family for a long time. The only person to sometimes visit him is his mother. Francisco believes that his kids are now criminals too, though he doesn't know for sure.
I'm always thinking about my kids, my sons. I look at this photo every morning.